Welcome to Compact Disasters from compacthistories.com, where we look at catastrophes, accidents, and natural disasters in short, bite-sized episodes. This is episode 66, the Rana Plaza collapse. In the suburb of Savar, around 24 kilometers northwest of central Dhaka, stood Rana Plaza, an 8-story concrete structure that had no business housing a major industrial workforce. Constructed in the mid-2000s, the building was officially approved for shops, offices, and a bank, not for factories filled with heavy machinery and thousands of workers. Despite this, by 2013, Rana Plaza contained 5 garment factories, a branch of a commercial bank, and multiple retail units. Each working day, an estimated 3,500 to 4,000 people entered the building, most of them garment workers producing clothing for international brands. The factories occupied the upper floors, where industrial sewing machines, cutting tables, fabric storage, and large numbers of employees were densely packed into confined spaces. Bangladesh's ready-made garment industry had grown at an extraordinary rate. By 2013, it accounted for around 80% of the country's export earnings and employed roughly 4 million workers, the majority women from rural or economically marginal backgrounds. Rapid expansion came at a cost. Buildings were frequently repurposed without proper inspection. Safety regulations were poorly enforced, and factory owners operated under intense pressure to meet international deadlines at the lowest possible cost. Rana Plaza reflected these systemic failures. Additional floors had reportedly been added illegally beyond the original permit. Heavy diesel generators were installed on upper levels to cope with frequent power cuts, a common feature of life in the area. These generators created constant vibration and significantly increased the load on a structure never designed to carry such weight or movement. The building's owner, Sohail Rana, was a local businessman with political connections. His influence helped shield the site from meaningful regulatory scrutiny. Complaints about safety were ignored, inspections were superficial, and responsibility was diffused across multiple authorities. By early 2013, Rana Plaza was operating at full capacity, outwardly unremarkable in a landscape filled with similar buildings. Yet structurally, it was deeply compromised. The conditions that would lead to catastrophe were not hidden or sudden. They were built into the walls, floor by floor, long before the collapse that would expose them to the world. On the morning of the 23rd of April 2013, workers arriving at Rana Plaza noticed something was wrong. Large cracks had appeared in the concrete walls and support columns across several floors. Pieces of plaster fell from ceilings, and loud cracking sounds were reported inside the building. Fear spread quickly among employees, many of whom refused to enter their factories. Local authorities were alerted, and television crews arrived, broadcasting images of the damage across Bangladesh. Engineers from the Rajdhani Unayan Kartrapaka and the fire service inspected the building later that day. Their conclusion was unequivocal. Rana Plaza was structurally unsafe and should be immediately evacuated. Police ordered the building closed, and an official notice was issued declaring it unfit for occupation. The bank and retail shops on the lower floors complied with the order. They shut their doors on the afternoon of 23rd April and did not reopen. The garment factories also ceased operations for the remainder of the day, and workers were sent home. Many believed they would not be asked to return until the building had been repaired or replaced. That expectation did not last. Factory owners faced imminent shipment deadlines for international buyers and stood to incur heavy financial penalties if production stopped. During the evening and early hours of the 24th of April, managers reportedly contacted workers, instructing them to return to work as normal. Some employees were told that the cracks had been inspected and declared harmless. Others were threatened with loss of wages or dismissal if they failed to show up. By early morning on the 24th of April, thousands of workers gathered outside Rana Plaza, many visibly distressed. Some refused to enter and protested openly. Others, fearing unemployment, complied. There is no evidence that any new structural inspection had taken place overnight, nor that the evacuation order had been formally lifted. At approximately 8 a.m., electrical power to the area failed, a routine occurrence in Savar. Factory generators on the upper floors were switched on, causing the building to vibrate. Less than an hour later, the warning signs that had been so clearly identified the day before would prove to have been ignored at catastrophic cost. At 8:57 a.m. on Wednesday, the 24th of April 2013, the 8-story Rana Plaza collapsed. Inside the building were several thousand garment workers, most of them already at their machines after being ordered back to work earlier that morning. What followed unfolded in less than 2 minutes and remains the deadliest industrial accident in the history of the garment industry. Moments before the collapse, witnesses reported intense shaking. The vibration from the generators travelled through a structure already weakened by cracks in its columns and load-bearing walls, resulting in catastrophic failure of the building. Rather than tipping or partially collapsing, Rana Plaza pancaked vertically. Each floor fell directly onto the one below it, crushing workers, machinery and furniture into layers of concrete and twisted steel. Many victims were killed instantly by crushing injuries. Others died within minutes from suffocation as air pockets disappeared beneath the debris. The sound of the collapse was heard across Savar, and a dense cloud of dust filled the surrounding streets. Nearby buildings shook violently. Survivors later described sudden darkness, unbearable pressure on their bodies, and the screams of colleagues that quickly fell silent. In some sections, sewing machines were compacted into slabs of concrete, no thicker than a desk. Emergency services arrived within minutes, but the scale of destruction was immediately apparent. The structure had disintegrated so completely that traditional rescue access points no longer existed. Stairwells, exits, and internal corridors were obliterated. Communication networks inside the building ceased instantly. By the end of the day, hundreds of bodies had been recovered. Over the following weeks, the confirmed death toll reached 1,134, with more than 2,500 people injured. Many of the injured suffered life-altering trauma, including amputations, spinal damage, and permanent respiratory injury. The collapse of Rana Plaza was not a freak accident or an unavoidable act of fate. It was the final violent consequence of ignored warnings, illegal construction, and the decision to prioritize production over human life. In the minutes following the collapse of Rana Plaza, chaos spread across Savar. Survivors trapped beneath the debris screamed for help, while dust and concrete still hung in the air. Local residents, shopkeepers, and other factory workers were the first to respond, digging with bare hands, metal rods, and whatever tools they could find. Formal rescue teams arrived quickly, but the scale of the disaster overwhelmed all available resources. The structure had collapsed so completely that locating survivors was extraordinarily difficult. Floors had compressed into dense layers of concrete, steel reinforcement bars, and industrial machinery. Air pockets were rare and unstable. Many victims were pinned in darkness, unable to move, surrounded by the dead and dying. Rescue workers had to cut through slabs, centimetre by centimetre, often working in silence, to listen for tapping or faint voices. Over the next 17 days, a massive rescue and recovery operation unfolded. The Bangladesh Army, fire service, police and volunteers worked around the clock. Heavy machinery was eventually brought in, but the risk of further collapse limited its use. Miraculously, at least 130 people were pulled alive from the ruins in the days following the collapse, including some who survived for more than 4 days without food or water. In addition to the physical injuries suffered by survivors, psychological trauma was widespread. Survivors reported long-term anxiety, nightmares, and guilt at having lived while friends and colleagues died beside them. Most of the victims were women between the ages of 18 and 35, many of whom were the primary earners for their families. The sudden loss of income pushed thousands of households into immediate poverty. Children were withdrawn from school, elderly relatives lost financial support, and entire communities were destabilized. Identification of bodies was a slow and painful process. Many victims were unrecognizable, and DNA testing was limited. Families waited for weeks for confirmation, often clinging to hope long after survival was impossible. By the time the last body was recovered, Rana Plaza had become not just a site of industrial failure, but a mass grave that exposed the true human cost of globalized production. In the days following the collapse of Rana Plaza, public anger in Bangladesh was immediate and intense. Survivors, families of victims, and labor activists demanded accountability, not sympathy. Protests erupted across Dhaka and other industrial centers, targeting factory owners, regulators, and political figures accused of enabling unsafe working conditions. The most visible focus of blame was the building's owner, Sohail Rana. He attempted to flee to India, but was arrested on the 28th of April 2013, 4 days after the collapse, while trying to cross the border. Rana was charged with illegal construction, negligence, and later murder, alongside factory owners and government officials accused of approving or ignoring safety violations. By 2016, formal charges had been brought against 38 defendants, including Rana, factory managers, engineers, and local authority figures. Legal proceedings moved slowly, reflecting long-standing weaknesses in Bangladesh's judicial system, and the case became a symbol of both progress and frustration in the pursuit of justice. Beyond the courtroom, Rana Plaza triggered a global reckoning within the garment industry. Brands whose clothing had been produced in the building faced intense scrutiny. Many initially denied responsibility, citing complex supply chains and subcontracting arrangements. Public pressure, consumer boycotts, and media exposure forced a shift in tone. For the first time, large Western brands were compelled to confront their role in enforcing low costs and rapid production timelines that incentivized dangerous practices. In May 2013, the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh was created. This was a legally binding agreement between international brands and trade unions. The accord required independent factory inspections, mandatory repairs, and brand-funded remediation. More than 200 brands eventually signed. A parallel industry-led initiative, the Alliance for Bangladesh Worker Safety, was launched by North American companies, though it lacked the Accord's legal enforcement mechanisms. While these initiatives marked a significant shift, critics argued they addressed symptoms rather than causes. Low wages, weak unions, and political influence continued to shape working conditions. Rana Plaza forced accountability into the open, but it did not resolve the deeper structural imbalance between global demand and local risk. The collapse exposed not just individual wrongdoing, but a system that functioned precisely as designed until it failed catastrophically. In the years following the collapse of Rana Plaza, Bangladesh's garment industry underwent changes that would have been unthinkable before April 2013. International attention, sustained activism, and legal pressure forced reforms that had long been resisted. Yet the legacy of Rana Plaza remains uneven, marked by genuine improvements alongside unresolved risks. One of the most immediate outcomes was the large-scale inspection of factories across the country. Under the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh, thousands of buildings were assessed for structural integrity, fire safety, and electrical hazards. By 2018, inspections had identified more than 100,000 safety issues, many of which were subsequently remediated. Reinforced columns, fire exits, alarm systems, and load limits became more common, particularly in factories supplying major international brands. Compensation for victims and their families was slower and more contentious. An international compensation fund, coordinated by the International Labour Organization, aimed to raise $40 million to cover lost income and medical costs. While the target was eventually met in 2015, many families had already endured years of financial hardship. Payments were often delayed, and survivors with long-term disabilities reported difficulty accessing ongoing medical care and employment. Rana Plaza also reshaped labour organising. Worker protests in the months after the collapse led to modest increases in the minimum wage and greater visibility for trade unions. However, unionisation remained limited, and reports of intimidation and dismissal of labour organisers continued. For many workers, the choice between safety and employment remained a false one. Despite reforms, fundamental pressures persisted. Bangladesh remained one of the cheapest garment producers in the world, and international brands continued to demand rapid turnaround at low cost. Subcontracting, informal production, and poorly regulated buildings did not disappear. Smaller factories operating outside major supply chains often escaped inspection altogether. The physical site of Rana Plaza was cleared, and in 2016, the remains of the building were removed. Plans for a memorial progressed slowly, reflecting ongoing political sensitivity. For survivors and families, the absence of a permanent, prominent memorial symbolized an unresolved reckoning. Rana Plaza did not end unsafe garment production, but it made denial impossible. It demonstrated that industrial disasters can be structurally predictable, not accidental. The reforms that followed saved lives, yet the conditions that allowed the collapse to happen were never fully dismantled. The question Rana Plaza left behind is not whether the world learned anything, but how much it was willing to change. That brings us to the end of this episode of Compact Disasters, part of the Compact Histories Network. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss any future episodes. And consider leaving a rating or review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can find more episodes at compactdisasters.com, where you can also explore our other podcasts covering biographies, history, true crime, warfare, and mysteries. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Finally, please consider supporting the show directly by buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/disasterscoffee to see how. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.